Elena Carter strode through the lobby of a Chicago high-rise, her heels clicking against the glossy marble floor. She had just left one of the worst meetings of the month, stubborn clients, a dissatisfied boss, and a nagging doubt about whether all of this effort was even worth it. She glanced at her phone one more time. No messages from her superiors. Maybe that was a good thing. She wasn't in the mood for more criticism. With a sigh, she pressed the elevator button, her eyes still scanning an unfinished email. The soft ding of the elevator sounded. She stepped forward without looking and, thud, collided hard with someone entering from the opposite side. "Oh, sorry," they spoke in unison, and as Elena looked up, she met a pair of sharp, stormy gray eyes. The man in front of her was tall, impeccably dressed in a deep navy suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, but what caught her attention was the vintage watch he kept adjusting on his wrist. "After you," he said with a polite smile, his voice carrying a faint East Coast lilt. Elena stepped inside, moving to the side as he followed. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and the elevator began its ascent. But seconds later, it jolted violently. Then stopped altogether. Elena pressed the emergency button. No response. "Attacking it won't help," the man remarked, amusement in his tone. Elena crossed her arms, casting him a sideways glance. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Elena leaned against the elevator wall and sighed. "This is the perfect way to end an already terrible day," she muttered. The man beside her tilted his head, intrigued. "How terrible are we talking?" She studied him for a moment before deciding to answer. "Clients who refused to listen. I pitched a bold new design, but all they wanted was a slightly different version of something they've seen 100 times. He nodded knowingly. "Sounds familiar." "What do you do?" she asked. "Investments," he said simply. "I run a firm that funds new projects." Elena let out a small laugh. "So you're one of the people who only care about the bottom line?" "Not exactly." He glanced down at his watch, adjusting it absent-mindedly. "Sometimes the bottom line isn't the most important thing." She was about to ask what he meant, but suddenly the emergency lights flickered on, casting a soft blue glow around them. The atmosphere shifted, more intimate, more personal. Elena slid down to the floor and pulled off her heels. "I don't know how long we'll be stuck here, but I'm not standing the whole time." The man regarded her for a moment before loosening his tie and lowering himself to the floor, maintaining a polite distance. "Damien, by the way." "Helena," she replied, resting her head back against the elevator wall. "Do you get stuck in places like this often?" He chuckled. "No, but I have to say this is the most interesting time it's happened." They talked about little things that somehow felt important. Damien mentioned how cooking was his escape from stress, and Elena reminisced about her childhood, building tiny paper houses in her room, dreaming of being an architect. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden crackle from the elevator intercom. "Is anyone in there?" Elena jumped up. "Yes, we're here. We're working on the issue. Should have you out in about 15 minutes. She exhaled in relief, but when she turned back to Damien, she caught something in his gaze, something almost reluctant. "Just 15 more minutes," he murmured. "What should we talk about?" That night, Elena lay awake, replaying the conversation in the dim elevator, the quiet laughs, the way Damien fidgeted with his watch, the way he listened. She had no reason to think she'd see him again, but somehow, she wished she would. 3 days later, Elena sat in her firm's main conference room, absent-mindedly chewing on her pen as she reviewed the project brief. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows, casting long shadows across the city skyline, but her thoughts were still trapped in that stalled elevator. She had tried to forget Damien, the mysterious stranger with storm-gray eyes and a voice that had stayed with her long after they parted. She hadn't even known his full name. But when her laptop screen displayed the client profile for their newest project, her breath caught in her throat. Damien Wolf, CEO of Wolf Enterprises. Her heart skipped a beat. She flicked a glance at her colleague, Madison, who was buzzing with excitement. "He's coming in today," Madison whispered, barely containing her enthusiasm. Damian Wolf, the investment genius, CEO of one of the biggest firms in the country. Elena forced herself to focus. She skimmed the project summary. Wolf Enterprises was seeking an interior design firm to renovate their headquarters. Landing this project would be a game changer for her career. But how was she supposed to stay professional when the man from the elevator was now her most important client? Before she could gather her thoughts, the conference room doors swung open. A group of executives entered, and leading them was Damian. He hesitated for the briefest of moments when his eyes met hers. A flicker of surprise, just a heartbeat's worth of recognition, before he masked it beneath a composed expression. "Thank you for having us," Damian said smoothly, his voice calm and collected. Elena gripped her pen tighter, forcing her own voice to remain steady. "A pleasure to be working with you, Mr. Wolf." Elena spent the next 2 days burying herself in work, doing her best to ignore Damian's presence. But no matter how focused she tried to be, she could feel his eyes on her during meetings. No matter how professional they both acted, the tension between them hovered like an unspoken secret. On Thursday evening, as she was clearing her desk, a new email popped up on her screen. From Damian Wolf. Subject: Design Inspiration. Elena, since we're keeping things strictly professional, I thought you might be interested in some reference materials for the project. Attached are a few space designs I find inspiring. Completely unrelated, but there's a small jazz club on 8th Street that plays incredible music on Thursday nights. I also hear their mac and cheese isn't bad. Professionally, Damian. Elena stared at the email, her pulse quickening. She shouldn't go. It was unprofessional. It was complicated. But then she imagined Damian sitting there, sipping his drink, waiting, maybe hoping. Before logic could stop her, she was slipping on her coat and stepping into a cab. The jazz club was small but intimate, the warm glow of dim lighting blending with the soulful hum of a saxophone. She chose a table near the back, telling herself this was just a night out, nothing more. Okay. She looked up and met Damian's gaze. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight, just a deep navy sweater that made him look softer, less distant. "This isn't a date," she said immediately. Damian smirked as he sat across from her. "Of course not. Just two people who happen to enjoy jazz at the same place and time." They talked. They laughed. And then, as a slow ballad played, Damian extended his hand. "Dance with me." Elena glanced around. "There's no dance floor." "So well, make one." And there, in the middle of a jazz club with no designated space for dancing, she let herself fall into his arms. The moment Elena stepped into the office the next morning, she could feel it. The stolen glances, the hushed whispers that quieted as she passed, the way Madison immediately intercepted her at the door. "What's going on?" Elena frowned. Madison shot a glance toward the conference room before pulling her aside. "Richardson knows about last night." Elena stiffened. "What about last night?" "You having dinner with Damian Wolf?" Madison lowered her voice. "Walsh saw you at the jazz club, and now the partners are discussing whether to remove you from the project." Elena felt like a stone had dropped into her stomach. "They can't do that." "You know they can." Madison sighed. "They're saying you got the project because of your connection to Damian." Anger flared inside Elena. "I worked my ass off for this project. If they think—" "Shh," Madison cut her off, glancing around. "Richardson is in a meeting with the senior partners. They're deciding soon." Elena's hands clenched into fists. She had spent weeks pouring herself into this design, and now, because of one dinner, they wanted to erase all of it? No. She wouldn't let that happen. She marched straight to her office, opened her laptop, and began refining her design. If they wanted a reason to keep her, she would give them one. Not with words, but with her work. 3 days later, as the critical meeting began, Elena sat in her usual seat, gripping her pen tightly. The senior partners spoke in turn, but she barely registered their words over the pounding of her own heartbeat. "The revised design has been reviewed," Richardson announced, his voice measured but sharp. "No one is questioning your talent, Elena, but from an objective standpoint, we cannot ignore external influences." Elena sat up straighter, her jaw tightening. So let me get this straight. You think my work is exceptional, but my personal life invalidates that? Richardson's lips pressed into a thin line. Perception matters, Miss Carter. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Then let me change that perception. Give me 5 minutes to prove why I'm the only person who should lead this project. Before anyone could respond, a deep voice cut through the room. If Elena isn't leading this project, Wolf Enterprises will reconsider our partnership. The room fell into dead silence. She could hear her own breath. Damien sat at the head of the table, fingers resting against his vintage watch, his expression unwavering. She's not just the best choice for this project, he continued. She's the only one who can bring it to life. Richardson looked like he had swallowed ice. After a tense pause, he gave a curt nod. Very well, Elena will remain the lead designer. As the meeting adjourned and people filed out, Elena remained seated, staring at Damien. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Damien stepped closer, stopping just before her. I'm not going to stand by and watch you be denied what you rightfully earned. For the first time in weeks, Elena let her shoulders relax. And for the first time, she stopped running from what she truly wanted. The morning sky over Chicago was clear, but the air carried the crisp bite of winter. Elena stood by the large office window, adjusting the delicate feather pendant around her neck, a gift from Damien. Below, the groundbreaking site was ready. Banners with the Wolf Enterprises logo waved in the wind, and reporters had already gathered. Today wasn't just about launching a project. It was about proving she belonged here. A warm hand touched the small of her back. Ready? Damien stood beside her, his gaze filled with quiet pride. Elena smiled. Together. The ceremony unfolded smoothly. Speeches highlighted sustainability and innovation. But when Damien took the stage, his words made the crowd fall silent. Innovation isn't just about technology or architecture. It's about having the courage to break old boundaries, to pursue what truly matters. As they each took hold of a ceremonial shovel, preparing for the first turn of soil, Damien leaned close and whispered, "Dance with me." Elena laughed. In front of hundreds of people? Why not? And as applause filled the air, beneath the crisp winter sun, he spun her into an impromptu dance. That evening, Elena sat by her apartment window, journal open in her lap, fingers tracing the small feather pendant around her neck. The necklace wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of her dreams, her resilience, everything she had built for herself. Damien had given it to her the day she officially secured her role as project lead, along with a simple note. Freedom isn't about running away, it's about knowing where you belong. And Elena knew now she didn't just belong to her work. She belonged to everything she had built, to the future she was brave enough to embrace. Day 82. Today, we didn't just break ground on a building. We broke ground on a future, one where love isn't an obstacle, but a driving force. One where I no longer have to choose between my career and my heart, because I've proven I deserve both. Her phone buzzed. A message from Damien. Remember when you said some spaces are meant to be filled? She smiled, her fingers curling around the pendant. Remember, I think some spaces aren't just meant to be filled, they're meant to be transformed. Like the space between two strangers in an elevator, becoming the foundation for forever. Elena laughed softly, touching the necklace. Ambitious Mr. Wolf, but lucky for you, I'm a damn good architect. Outside, the city shimmered like an unfinished blueprint, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. 3 months later, Elena couldn't remember the last time she felt so at ease. She sat at the grand dining table of the Wolf family home, surrounded by warm laughter and the comforting aroma of homemade lasagna. Damien's mother, a graceful woman with a kind smile, placed another steaming dish on the table. "Eat, dear," she said fondly. "Damien rarely brings anyone home, you know." Elena chuckled, glancing at Damien. "Is that so?" He merely shrugged, a mysterious glint in his eyes. After dinner, Damien took her hand and led her outside. The backyard was bathed in the soft glow of fairy lights, reflecting off the dewy grass in the crisp spring air. Elena's heart pounded as he led her deeper into the garden. Something about his grip felt different, firmer, almost nervous. The air was still, the world quiet, as if waiting. "I wanted to show you this place," Damien said, guiding her to a small table beneath a trellis of blooming flowers. "I grew up here, spent my childhood running through this garden, and now I want it to be the place where something else begins." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. As he flipped it open, a stunning ring caught the warm light. "Elena Carter, you're not just the woman I love. You're the woman who changed me, who showed me that love isn't about sacrifice, it's about building something together. So," he took a breath, "will you marry me?" Elena brought a hand to her mouth, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She didn't need to think. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed joyfully. 1,000 times yes. 3 months later, springtime in Chicago, the sky was clear and the city lights twinkled like artificial stars. But nothing shone brighter than Elena in her wedding dress. Elegant, graceful, a perfect reflection of her strength and beauty. She stood on the rooftop of a high-rise, the venue they had chosen for their wedding. String lights glowed softly, white roses lined the railings, and the smooth hum of jazz floated through the crisp evening air. Damien waited at the altar, and the moment he saw her, everything else disappeared. The city, the crowd, even the nerves he'd been battling all morning. It all faded into the background. All he saw was Elena, radiant and breathtaking, walking toward him like she'd always belonged there. As she walked toward him, the world around them seemed to fade away. "When we met, the elevator stopped," Damien whispered as he took her hands. "But from that moment on, you made my entire world move." Elena smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I thought I had to choose between love and my career, but then I realized real love never makes you choose." They exchanged rings, sealed their vows with a kiss, and as applause erupted around them, Damien leaned in and murmured, "Dance with me?" And under the city lights, with jazz humming in the background, they danced, not just for this moment, but for a lifetime to come.